Dr. Ariana Hoet is the Executive Clinical Director of the Kids Mental Health Foundation and a clinical assistant professor at Nationwide Children's Hospital and The Ohio State University. She has been recognized as a Distinguished Hispanic Ohioan and received the American Psychological Association Early Career Award for her work with children and families. Dr. Hoet has become a national expert on youth mental health, appearing on CNN, Good Morning America, and other major outlets. Her work helped bring U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy to discuss the pediatric mental health crisis and led to a White House roundtable on mental health in entertainment. She's also co-founder of Parenting Culture, a nonprofit focused on culturally responsive parenting resources. Hi, Ariana. Thank you so much for your time.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So I want to start with the Surgeon General. I know you've worked closely with his office. So according to the Surgeon General's 2023 advisory on social media and youth mental health, depression and anxiety in kids and adolescents has reached its highest point in history, doubling during the pandemic, with 25% of youth experiencing depression, 20% experiencing anxiety. So what do you think are the main contributors to this decline in youth mental health?
I love this question because as a society, we always wish there was a simple answer to it. We want this one thing that's contributing because then we can have a one solution. And oftentimes I do hear people talking about social media as being that one thing that they think is the reason that kids' mental health isn't doing well right now. And that would be great, right? We just take it away and kids are going to be thriving again. But the reality is that social media is just one factor.
Yep.
The Surgeon General outlines in his report all these different things that go from genetics, like the personal factors, what a kid's genetics and personality traits are, all the way to their home environment, community environment, school environments, and to our systems, our laws, right? All of that impacts kids. And so some of the things that is highlighted in his report, yes, social media, but also there's an increase in isolation. Kids are experiencing a lot of pressure when they're growing up to
Yeah.
succeed, to compete against others, to be busy. But then there's also community violence, systemic inequities. And I'm always surprised in therapy at how young kids are bringing up things like current events,
Yeah.
the state of the world, climate change. And so all of these things together are really weighing on our kids' mental health.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I couldn't agree more. We never say that tech is the full story. It's only a small piece of it, even though, like you said, that report was called Social Media and Youth Mental Health. There are so many things, some of them connected to tech, some not. One thing that I don't think he did bring up, but I know that like Jonathan Haidt, for example, talks about this a lot, which is the decline of play. I don't know if that's something that you've noticed as well, where kids are playing together less, and I'm talking about in person. So I don't know if
Yeah.
that's anything you wanted to add to.
Absolutely. I see it in therapy all
Yeah.
the time. When I ask a child, what do you like to do?
Mm-hmm.
It's always really sad when there's silence,
Yeah.
or when the answer is watch TikTok, play
Yep.
Roblox, right? Um, it's great. I mean, that's fine for you to have that hobby, and there's nothing else. There is no playing soccer, going to the park with my friends. And so that's what I worry about is the lack of balance. It's the lack of having these other activities outside of the technology world. And so a lot of what we do in therapy is okay, you don't have to stop this completely, but can we add other things to your life, other hobbies?
Yeah. And I think it's so tough for parents and for kids too. It's not a fair fight because nothing is going to be as good as TikTok in terms of how much dopamine it's giving you. So it's really, really challenging. And that's one of the signs that we advise parents to look for is have they lost interest in other
Yeah.
activities, right? Because it's so hard to find that balance when the tech industry, that's kind of all they want to do is own your attention, right? So it's just not fair to kids, and it's not fair to families either to have to manage that. So I feel for everybody. It's really, really tough. So can we zoom out a little bit and talk about just mental health and tech in general. So at Dopamine, one of our biggest founding principles is we believe every child has the right to understand the relationship between mental health and tech. And I know that we just covered that mental health is obviously a much bigger story, but let's just zoom in on tech a little bit. So what are some of the key connections between tech use and mental health outcomes in kids?
I love that that's one of your founding principles because in therapy, I always teach the concept of mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, mindfulness is misunderstood as meditation.
Yeah.
But really, what mindfulness means is awareness,
Yep.
really noticing your emotions, noticing your surroundings. And so, what you just asked, right? The connection between tech use and mental health outcomes. That's something we have to teach kids. We
Yeah.
have to teach kids to be mindful of how is technology impacting you. And so you just scrolled on TikTok for 30 minutes. How do you feel? And so taking that pause to really notice it is important. And the data shows us, in that Surgeon General report you mentioned, more than 3 hours of social media use doubles the risk of things like depression and anxiety,
Yeah.
and teens are telling us they're using 3.5 hours a day on average. So most kids are using more of that, more than those 3 hours that we know are doubling risk. And then there's all the other things. It's exposure to bullying.
Yeah.
It impacts our sleep. There's because kids' brains are developing, they're more likely to take on risk-taking behaviors, and
Yeah.
so we worry about self-harm, eating disorders, doing challenges that could be dangerous to them. And then, yeah, it's always going to vary kid to kid and how they're using social media and the time they're spending on it. But we know that, just as you mentioned, their brains are developing and these platforms are made to keep them hooked. So we're going to see them exposed to things that could be harmful because of the way the algorithm works. Kids are also a lot more likely to show mood fluctuations at the age,
Yeah.
and it's developmentally appropriate, and then they're being exposed to bullying or hate comments, and so it's just a lot being thrown at them for them to process at an age when their brain is not made for processing those things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more about awareness being the number one because it's hard. I mean, even if you are aware, like even as adults, we're all pretty aware that this stuff is not great for us. And it's still hard for us to put down our phones, right? So I always think about that in the context of kids who don't have a fully formed brain, like you alluded to. And not to get too technical, but the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that helps us pump the brakes, right? On thoughts, behaviors, activities, like things that we know are probably not so good for us, right? And that doesn't form until what most are saying around age 25, right? So again, I kind of go back to like it's not a fair fight, right? And yes, awareness is super important, but even if we teach awareness, it's just so hard for kids to be able to put those brakes on
Mhm.
themselves. And that's why we work a lot with the parents and the educators as well, because they do need help with those boundaries.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I would say that's the number one recommendation I tell parents is, if you decide to give access, then you need to be there daily to help,
Yeah.
monitoring, setting boundaries, and really ensuring not just how much time they're using, because I think most parents understand that, like, okay, there's limits to the time, but then it's what they're accessing, what they're using.
Yeah.
As you said, it's even hard for adults, and so let
Yeah.
alone kids. One of the things we do in therapy often is, what kind of accounts do you follow? Maybe you stop following accounts that show fitness influencers because it makes you
Yeah.
feel bad about your body. Maybe you stop following accounts about, people with these big lifestyles because it's not something that you're living. And so just making those decisions with the kids is
Yeah. And
critical.
wouldn't it be easy if it was just time, right? Because like I tell my parents all the time, like I almost hate the word screen time
Yeah.
because it's like, what are you doing? Are you
Mhm.
doing math homework or are you scrolling TikTok? Like those two things are
Exactly.
very, very different in terms of what's going on in your brain and your body. But that's also what makes it so hard for parents to navigate. Like, how do I determine like what media is good, better, best. So we
Right.
really try to help them do that. But you mentioned earlier how difficult it is for families to manage. Like, I feel for them. That's one of the reasons why I personally delay for my kids, is I know how much work it is to oversee this stuff properly, you know? So it's just, it's not easy for parents right now.
It's
Yeah.
not, and sometimes kids are smarter than us. Most
Oh,
of the times, they're smarter than
often.
us when it
Yeah.
comes to social media. And so,
Yeah.
um, I'm sure we'll get to this, but in the end, what really, really matters is the parent-child relationship,
Yeah, for
so that
sure.
they're not going behind our backs.
So let's talk about it a little bit, like not so much about tech, but why should parents talk to their kids about mental health? And when is the best age to start having those conversations?
I think the best age is the moment they're born.
Yeah.
we teach kids their ABCs and one, two, threes and the colors, and we should be also teaching them emotion words and how do those emotions feel in their bodies. I have a 15-month-old right now that has very low frustration tolerance, and so I've been telling him like, "Oh wow, you're crying. You are frustrated, right?"
Yeah.
And is he responding to me? No, he's still crying. But it's normalizing, and as they get older, then you're going to have more complex conversations about those emotions and how they feel. Um, the biggest protective factor out there when it comes to kids' mental health is a healthy relationship with their parents. And so,
Hmm.
talking to them about their thoughts, their feelings, their experiences, that's going to create the relationship. It's also going to create that space where kids know this adult I can come to. If anything ever goes wrong, I can go to them.
Yeah.
And also just builds awareness. Things like depression and anxiety, we call them internalizing disorders. And the
Hmm.
reason for that is they're internal. And so we may not know that kids are going through depression or anxiety unless we're having conversations with them every day.
Yeah. I think, again, when you were talking, I was thinking about the word awareness again, because just being aware of your feelings is huge, isn't it? Even as, like you said, your 15-month-old might not be quite there yet, but you're starting to form that foundation, right? For him to be able to do that later. And then the other thing that came to mind was just the word validating, validating that it's okay to feel frustrated. It's okay to feel sad. And then, maybe later on when we're talking about tech, yeah, it's normal to not feel good about yourself when you're seeing other people's great lives. That's called
Mhm.
FOMO, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
in early childhood, this, but uh, experts use the concept of name it to tame it, right? So that's kind of what we're talking about here when it comes to feelings, but we use that as well when we talk about tech later on. You're feeling FOMO, you're feeling
Mhm.
social exclusion, you're feeling social comparison. And if we do this from the very beginning, like you said, I think it becomes easier for us to normalize these conversations, but also for them to form that awareness, even though it's hard when we get to tech later
yeah,
on.
yeah.
So,
Well,
okay.
especially because a lot of the kids using tech tend to be teenagers, and they
Yeah,
are in a developmental stage where they want to push back a little bit more. They want to be
yeah,
independent. They don't want their parents telling them what to do. And again,
sure.
developmentally appropriate. So if you wait to have discussions until you're worried, that's going to be super awkward. Your teenager is
Yeah,
going to hate that experience. And so that's
right,
where we say, like, from day one, build the habit of talking about not concerning things, just talking about their
right,
day, their thoughts, their feelings, because then when you are concerned, it won't feel like this weird thing. Like, why are you bringing this up? What's going on?
right. And even little things like I remember saying, yeah, you were mad that I didn't cut off the crusts of your bread,
Yes.
whatever it
Yes.
is. Like those little things, like you said, are building blocks for
Mhm.
bigger discussions later. So I love that advice. Okay, let's talk about this idea that at Dopamine we call digital privilege. So I'm going to set it up by giving you a couple statistics. So, lower income teenagers spend an average of 8 hours and 7 minutes a day using screens for entertainment, while higher income peers spend 5 hours and 42 minutes. Both are a lot. This is according to Common Sense Media. And so, as I said at Dopamine, we use the term digital privilege to talk about this disparity amongst others, right? It's a privilege to limit and unplug. So, why do you think underprivileged kids are more impacted by the negative effects of technology?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. We have to ask, it's to me, it's not so much that technology impacts them more, it's that they're at higher risk for poor mental health outcomes because of all the other factors going on. So the question I ask is why is it that they're spending more time?
Hmm.
My guess would be, these are lower income kids, which likely means that their parents are forced to spend more time at work. Maybe they hold
Yeah.
two jobs, right? They're out of the home more. And so technology can be really helpful for these parents. It may be the only option. If
Yeah.
I'm having to work, then this is what's going to entertain my child. Um, so I think that that's one case. But the other piece of it, and we touched on it earlier, is that we know that parents of diverse communities have a disparity when it comes to access to evidence informed information.
Hmm.
Um, Parents from these communities may simply not know that social media impacts their child's mental health. They
Yeah.
may not have the tools to set those boundaries, teach adequate technology use. And so it's up to us to give that information to these parents to make sure that these communities have access, because then they can make their parenting decisions based on their values but also based on this education. So I
Yeah.
think for me it's the systems that they find themselves in,
Yeah.
but also this Surgeon General report that you mentioned called out that 2/3 of teens are exposed to hate-based content on social media.
Hmm.
And so if we know that kids from underrepresented communities are spending even more time on social media than other kids, and then they're seeing this hate oftentimes about their communities, that's going to impact their mental health, and that makes it a huge risk for their wellness.
Yeah, that is so interesting. Let's actually talk about that a little bit more. You have actually spoken publicly about experiencing racism as an immigrant, and this wasn't necessarily online, but it's something that you've talked about. And what you just said, algorithms can reflect and amplify existing societal biases, including racism. And that's due to the data they're trained on, the biases of the people who create them, and that can lead to discriminatory outcomes online. So, can you speak more to that? Can you speak to how racism is experienced online by adolescents and what families can do to talk to their kids about this issue?
Yeah, I mean, this is so important because adolescence, childhood is a time when humans are developing their identity. They're figuring out their place in the world, where they are, who they are. And imagine then getting on social media and reading things that are negative about who you are, or who your community is, who your family is. And that can become internalized if there is no adult helping a child process that, because again their brains are developing, and so
Mhm.
a child may start to truly believe these statements that they're reading, which we know that's, with racism, they're often wrong, they're often
Yeah.
not true statements, but kids don't know that. And so for parents, there's this thing we call, in the literature, racial ethnic socialization. And racial ethnic socialization has two parts. One part is you build pride in your child for who they are. Whether it's their racial background or their cultural background, but you practice traditions, you tell them about the heroes in their community, you connect them with people like them, and that pride helps them kind of be able to bounce off any negative things they hear because they're proud of who they are. They know those things they're reading are wrong, and it helps them um, be more resilient. The other part of racial ethnic socialization is preparing them for the reality that their communities tend to face more racism, discrimination, and systemic obstacles. And so
Mhm.
it's having the conversations, if you're giving access to your child to social media, to say, you may see these things about our community, and come talk to me. We can process how you're feeling. Here's how you respond, having even a script ready for them. Um, and then I would say to all parents, making sure that you talk to your children about what's okay to post and not post, what's okay to engage with and reshare, and then what adults they talk to if they are seeing these things. Because we also don't want the kind of kids that maybe it's not about me and my community, but I'm amplifying or engaging with that messaging or posting it myself. So it kind of takes every parent and every community to decrease the harm.
Yeah, this is such a tough one. And I will say, because I speak to a lot of the school leaders, this is at the top of the list of things that they are battling every day. The things that kids are seeing, hearing, and repeating that they're seeing online. And I'll just add one more thing to that, because everything you said, yes, yes, yes. But I think it's really hard for parents to understand this, which is that hateful content often rises to the top. And the reason is the algorithms are optimized for engagement, right? So even though it's stuff people don't want to see, they don't like it, they're more likely to be fighting, right? Or saying, hey, that's terrible, or going back and forth. And that actually helps engagement, right? So that's the number one. And then number two is what we refer to as kind of the rabbit hole effect. And we see this a lot. You mentioned like eating disorders and things like that. So I'll use that example for now, but it's the same for racism. So let's say you go online and, maybe you're just looking for healthy eating habits or healthy recipes or something like that. The algorithms will feed you more and more of that type of content, right? But that's not enough. It's going to get more extreme. It's going to get more varied to keep you on longer. So soon you'll be seeing, thigh gap challenge tips and ultimately, pro anorexia tips, at the very end of that rabbit hole. So I think the same thing happens with racist content, right? And if you're already in a marginalized community and maybe lingering on that content a little bit longer because it has to do with your specific community, you're going to be fed more of that, which is terrible because that becomes an echo chamber that you think is real, where it's really just the algorithms like prioritizing that and making it feel like that's the world, but that's not the world. But it's really sad that and I think it's really hard for parents to understand that.
Yeah, and I mean, yes, anything with high emotion, the algorithm's gonna show more of. And I think what's hard is that now, because kids have their phone everywhere, they're seeing this content at home, at
Yep.
school, during their fun activities. Like no matter what, it's there. It's constant. Um, and
Yeah.
so, yeah, and that's why one of the things we recommend often is co-viewing, sitting down with your child and scrolling together,
Yeah.
because you want to notice what is the algorithm showing them a lot of, and what does their explore pages look like, because
Yep.
those are based on what your child's engaging with. So if you
Hmm.
start to see a lot, whether racism, but as you're mentioning, anorexia content, self-harm content, that's going to give you an idea of what your child is really engaging, and what great conversation starters right there.
Yeah.
You don't want to be judgmental, you don't want to get them in trouble, but wow, like I noticed your explore page had a lot of things about the thigh gap or dieting, and so I think that's where parents can kind of use that to their advantage to show them what is my child spending a lot of time engaging with.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the For You pages, because I'm going to say one more thing about this, which is your kids' feed is not yours.
Right.
So we might go on Instagram or TikTok or whatever and see really, benign things, recipes, cat videos, whatever, right? You open up a 13, 14, 15-year-old's For You page, they're being fed things that they are not even seeking out, that
Mhm.
the companies know is going to get them to engage,
Yeah.
and it's often very harmful. So I completely agree. Like, don't just trust that their Instagram is going to be just fine, like yours. Definitely be looking at it with them would be great, but at least checking in on it to
Mhm.
see what they're being fed, because it's often things that they're not even seeking out that can be
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
harmful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think a lot of parents do the I'm on my phone and I go on my child's account to see what they're posting.
No.
But less parents sit with their child to look at their phone and what their account is showing them.
Yep.
And that's, like you said, very different
Yeah.
worlds.
Yeah. Okay, so let's back out up a little bit again, because you talked about earlier, you alluded to the idea of family and parent child connection. So, in one of the talks you gave, you talked about this idea of Felissimo from your culture, which is the idea that family comes first. And we know how important family is for kids' mental health as well. And we also know that technology can isolate family members and strain family relationships. So, how can families maintain a strong family bond despite the challenges technology brings to human connection?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things. One is how it's being used, right? For me as an immigrant, I love technology because it's allowed me to connect to family. When I first moved to the US, the only way to talk to my family back home was these little scratch cards that you had to dial like 20 numbers and then you get 5 minutes for $20. It was terrible. And
Yeah.
then Blackberries came around and all of a sudden we could chat and then, WhatsApp and FaceTime. And so now I talk to my aunts, my cousins, my grandparents truly daily because of the group chats. And
Yeah.
there are times when my grandma has called me because I haven't posted on my Instagram story for a couple of days, and she's like, "Are you okay?" So, I mean, it just helps us just stay in each other's lives and know
Yeah.
what we're up to. But then there's the other piece of parents and kids colliding and getting frustrated with each other and fighting all the time over
Hmm.
social media limits. And so, what I tell families in therapy is your job as a parent is to keep your child safe.
Yeah.
It is okay and it is expected for you to set rules and consequences and then implement those consequences, even if your child gets angry, because that is your job. What helps is setting expectations up ahead of time. Create a family social media plan ahead
Hmm.
of time and decide when are you going to use, what are you going to use, what platforms, who are you connecting with, what times are you logging off, just talk through all of that. And we have a family social media plan on our website that's free for families to download
Hmm.
that guides them through that. Um, but the idea is you're setting up the expectation ahead of time, and if that's broken, you're gonna implement the consequence, and your kid
Yeah.
may be upset, but again, that's what we all agreed to.
Hmm.
um, and then again, I go back to everything we've said, which is it's your relationship that matters most. So sit with them, watch with them, show interest in what they're doing, do their dances with them, be a part of their trends, just like we would show interest in any other hobby that they have. Don't judge them for this if it's not hurting their mental health, if
Hmm.
they're just connecting with something they enjoy and it's helping their creativity or exploring their identity, then try and show that interest in leaning in.
So true. And I think the most important thing of what you talked about is boundaries. And this is something I've talked to so many experts about. And it's also something I've spoken to thousands of parents at this point in my parent eds that I think modern parents really struggle with is
Yeah,
setting boundaries.
yeah.
Thank you for mentioning the tool. That's super helpful because going into it with a plan makes all the difference. But I will say, even though your kids might not like you for it, they actually deep down, they like boundaries, they
Hmm.
need boundaries, and it's
Yes,
our job. It's like one of our number one jobs is to
yes.
help set those boundaries. So when we work with elementary parents, we tend to, while we don't like to tell families what to do at all, but we tend to focus on the idea of delaying and
Hmm.
minimizing them as much as possible when kids are little. But when they're older, setting those boundaries.
Yeah.
So it can be time, it can be phones out of the bedrooms, it can be, small things to
Mhm.
bigger things, but they really, really need that. And back to our earlier, we were talking about the prefrontal cortex and how they can't stop themselves.
Mhm.
They need us to do it. They will not be able to do it on their own.
No,
I'm sorry. Like no matter how smart or capable or trustworthy your kid is, these systems are just too powerful. So I think that's really important.
yeah,
And then the last thing I'll add to that, because I'm hoping for this someday, I'm seeing glimmers of this, but they will thank you someday. I hear about this constantly
yeah.
from parents that have delayed set
Mhm.
boundaries of their kids that get to a certain age. It usually happens maybe junior, senior of high school, sometimes college, where they say, wow, thank you. Thank you
Mhm.
for putting limits on this. Thank you for overseeing it. I just wanted to add those couple things because it feels so hard when your kids are little, but it does get easier and ultimately they will appreciate it.
Yeah.
So
You know what also really helps is from the very young age, creating a space where you talk about your family values. What kind of family do you want to be,
yeah.
right? Um, and so, things like we are kind to each other, we're respectful, and we have fun together. Whatever the each family is going to be different, but also talking about my job, and I do this with my five-year-old. Like my job as your parent is to keep you safe. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'm going to ask you to do things, and it is going to make you mad or frustrated or sad, but it's to keep you safe. And I'm sorry if you're feeling sad or angry, but you have to do it. And so having those conversations constantly, consistently helps. And it helps when they come to you with the question of, why can my friend have it and not me? Because
Mm-hmm.
you've built that, normalize the conversation of what our family is like.
Yeah.
And so I've already started to get the question like, well, my cousin has a tablet. Why can't I have a tablet?
Sure.
And I say each family is different. Each
Yep.
family has different values. Their parents are okay with them having the tablet. We're not going to do tablets in our home. And it
Yep.
just, there's no judgment of them, and there's no judgment. No one is good or bad, but it's just like each family has different values. And so far, she's only 5. I am very sure it will get harder the older she
Yeah.
gets. But so far, that's helping. Like, okay, sure, that's fine. Each family's different, and we move
Yeah.
on.
We say all the time is exactly what you just said, but different families, different choices.
Yeah.
It's a really simple way of looking at it. I love you talking about the family values. Another thing, I don't know if you agree with this, that I've been saying in my own household is, you know what, when you have your family, you can do it differently.
Yeah.
And it works. They don't love it, but it's really true. Like, everybody gets to design their families the way they want to and have the values that they want to. And yeah, they might not like it, but it's the situation that we've designed, as a family. So I love that, actually. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to ask you about one more topic, which is a big hot topic issue. And I feel like it's just exponentially changing every day. So it's AI.
Mhm.
But I want to ask you specifically about AI chatbots. So teens specifically are increasingly turning to AI chatbots like Replica and Character AI are a couple examples for emotional support and advice. So in 2 cases, parents have filed lawsuits against Character AI after their teenage children interacted with chatbots that claim to be licensed therapists. So this is like your world directly. It's touching you specifically. So what do you think about this trend? Loaded question.
Yeah, I mean, to be transparent, because like you said, this is developing also quickly that I don't know the science right now behind AI and how it's impacting kids' mental health, specifically as you're saying, kids using it as therapy. I know that there is the American Psychological Association is really leaning into this and studying it, and I just have not had the time to kind of consume it and process.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I can tell you as a psychologist, hearing you talk about this and seeing the common sense media reports and all of that, uh, my question is, if kids are turning to these AI chatbots, my guess would be that it's likely because they don't have someone in real life to turn to, right?
Yeah.
I go back to what I've been kind of a broken record about in this conversation, which is that parent child relationship. And
Mm-hmm.
honestly, it could be a teacher student relationship, coach athlete. Like, all it takes is one adult in a child's life that they feel safe and supported by. And so, to me, the question I ask is a child using that AI bot because they don't have someone that they can turn to? And so, that's kids need heard and supported, and they want to be listened to. And so, I think for parents that are experiencing the fear, I would say really lean into those conversations, creating those safe spaces, low judgment, just listening, being there for your child. But then also make a part of your conversations asking them about how they use technology and increasing their tech literacy so that they know a chatbot can tell you that they're a licensed therapist, they are not, right?
Yeah.
And so it's building those safe spaces and conversations and relationships, but also the literacy, because they they are accessing it,
Yeah.
to be ready.
I'll be completely transparent. We are saying no till 18.
Mhm.
That is what I'm hearing from most of the other experts in all kinds of fields, online safety, everything else. It's just moving too fast. There's just too many harms already. And to me, it goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is that currently these systems are engagement based, just like
Mhm.
social media, but now we multiply it exponentially in terms of intelligence, right? There's this quote, it was a businessman, I forget his name now, and he said something like, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. So if the incentive is to make money, we can guess that the outcomes are not going to be, what we want them to be. The other thing that we do know about these chatbots is they're telling people what they want to hear,
Mhm.
right? Because again, they want them to stay on longer, they want them to form a relationship. And often that means they might be getting advice or feedback that is not reality. They're getting their ego puffed up and they're feeling really good, maybe, right? But that is not helpful to anybody, but especially to somebody with a developing mind. And then, I mean, there's so many things I can say, but lastly, it has been proven as well that we've seen multiple lawsuits and sadly even
Mhm.
deaths already through these chatbots of young people. They're abusive. So, again, not to get into too much detail on that, but they can tell and suggest horrible things to
Mhm.
kids that are not helpful to their well-being. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
And then lastly, like, I don't know about these chatbots in particular, but I know like the generative AIs, like the chat GPTs and things like that, they still hallucinate. So, and that means they will give you information that's just completely false.
Oh, yeah.
But they will say it in a way that is just, they're so confident about their wrongness that to a child that doesn't know that information, it can feel very real. So those are
Mhm.
just some of the things.
Yeah.
But to me, this is very concerning. And I completely agree with you, which is like, hey, let's form that great relationship so they can come to a parent or a trusted adult before they turn to a chatbot. But I would say, even if you have that trusted relationship, it is really, I think these systems are incredibly compelling.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I just think it's challenging no matter
Absolutely.
what, even if you have a good relationship with your kid.
I had when the Surgeon General released the report on social media, one of the lines that jumped out and really changed my way of seeing things, and I think it applies to where we are with AI, is the scientific community kind of was sending this message of we don't yet have enough data evidence to say social media is harmful,
Yeah.
right? But the Surgeon General said, kind of flipped that and said, we don't have enough data to say that it's safe.
Yeah.
And that to me was like, huh,
Yeah.
because we were acting on this like we don't know that there's harm, but in what other scenario would we allow our kids to do something that we don't know is safe? Would we allow them on a roller coaster where it's like, well, we don't know, it's not been proven that it crashes, that it's harmful, but we don't know yet if it's safe. It's a so that statement in his report really helped me change my way of approaching. Like, sure, we don't have enough data on the harm yet, but we also don't have enough data that makes me feel fully comfortable with kids having full access to this thing.
That is
And
so true.
AI
And
applies to
I
that.
would I would say by the time we get the data, it's probably going to be too late, right? And we've seen that with social media where we haven't regulated it. There's been no meaningful legislation since 1998 about the internet in general in kids. So we don't have time to wait. And I'll just say one more thing about this point, which is, we've talked about big tobacco, we've talked about cars with other experts, and both of those things took 20, I think one was 26 years, one was 34 years between when we knew people were being harmed to when we actually had laws about it. And with AI, and again, this is why I go back to no until 18, it's going to move so much faster than we can keep up with, not just on the legal front, but on and everything. And you mentioned that, like even people in your space are struggling to kind of keep up and understand what's going on. And by the time they do, it'll change. So, yeah. So, I mean, I have a lot to say about AI, obviously, but definitely, hopefully, I think we agree, not a good idea to use that as your therapist.
Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely not. Um, I mean, everything you said, right? We don't, the, the computer, bot, whatever you want to call it, is created to say what you want it to say.
Yeah.
That's not what a therapist does, right?
Right.
So it could be helpful in finding a tool here and there, just like Google, but it could never replace the therapist.
That's so true. Well, I think that's a great place to end, hopefully on a positive note. Pro humanity, right? Humans, family connection. I think that theme has continued through, and I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate it. I love your voice and everything you're doing with Kids Mental Health Foundation. I'm so glad you mentioned the tool that you have for creating a social media plan. I'll make sure to share a link to that as well. So thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.